As we continue to look at the rich history of the Pillager Gap, tonight we're going to take a look at the country schools. How many, show of hands, how many attended a country school? See, those of you that didn't, you're going to find out what you missed out on.
Let's touch on where you were raised and how many members of your family and.
Not very good on my part. Early on the video.
Oh, you started early. Cut it out. We're not ready yet. There was a missionary school that was established in Leech Lake in 1918.
Touch on where you were raised and.
That's why we hired John. Think how bad it could be. I could be doing that. That's all right, John.
Same day.
But the first public school was established at Gull River. It was kind of ironic because the parents, there was about 40 students that needed a school. They didn't have one, and so the parents petitioned Crow Wing County to have a school because there was a lot of confusion to where Gull River was in Crow Wing or Cass. They were trading property back and forth for about 20 to 30 years after the state organized. And so the first public school, they were denied by Crow Wing County, so they went ahead and just put it in the Gull River Sawmill office building in the second story. So that was the first school in Cass County. The second school in Cass County was a log structure built in Pillager. Residents of Gull River, when they did get going on it, and this school didn't last long because the city of Gull River didn't last very long. In 1889, I'm dyslexic too. All of Cass County was designated as one school district. In 1965, Minnesota still had over 700 one-room schools. The Crescent School, located in Poplar Township, which by the way is near Leader, was the last one-room public school in Cass County. It closed in 1969. So what we've got tonight is we're going to have a panel up here in a little bit, but we did get a video we made last year when back in the COVID days and Zoom and stuff, and we thought we should get some stuff on a video. So we did. And I'm kind of proud of this one because this is my Aunt Ruthie, who taught for 25 years in country schools, later moving on, and I'll get into that later. But John, if you would go ahead now and start that video, and I'll get out of here for a while.
Let's at least touch on where you were raised and how many members of your family and how you went to a rural school. Maybe you could start with that, Ruth.
Well, I was born in the country north of Leader, Minnesota, and I had two brothers and a sister, mother and dad, and that was our family. And we were not impoverished, but we didn't have much money. So we raised our food, and my dad was, he worked on the rural roads, grading them. And so we had a little money, but we had to sit down when his check came. We'd sit down at the supper table and we'd say, I remember Evie and I, my sister and I, would run out to meet Dad. Our check came, our check came. And I went to rural schools. I went to 2 rural schools. I went to the first school, Crescent School, for 2 years. And then I went to Poplar School.
And where was Crescent School located?
North of us, well, we moved because we lived up by Crescent School, and it was probably 8 miles north of Leader. See, my dad had taught me to read before I went to school, and I read my way through the first 4 books because we didn't have very many, and there wasn't anything else to do with me but promote me ahead. So then we moved down to Poplar, and when I should have been in the 3rd grade, I was in the 5th grade. You know, you had just the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. So I graduated through those, but my the thing that made it difficult for when we moved to Poplar is that my understanding hadn't increased. You have to realize that a child has to mature, the brain has to mature in order to be able to understand certain things. The reason I was having trouble was I could and I did. I memorized how to do the math, but I didn't understand it. And then in history and geography, I learned to memorize the facts, but I didn't understand them until I went over them again years later. So that was fortunate for me in a way. It was a trial, but it made it easier for me when I taught because I could understand the youngsters that were having trouble. I passed the 8th grade state board exams when I was in 7th grade. But my mom and dad had me go on through the 8th grade, and then I passed the exams again. So I've got 2 diplomas.
And the 8th grade was sort of the end point, wasn't it, back then?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And actually, we didn't think we could go to high school because there was no buses. But that next year, the Staples School sent out the very first bus. And so my brother George and Evie and I went on the bus to Staples. It was, it didn't have a heater in it. It was,
Wow.
but we really appreciated the ride. And then we had to pay for our own ride. Well, what were we going to do to go to our senior year? Brother George had graduated. My grandparents lived in Motley, and Evie and I went down to Motley and stayed with them and went to school in Motley for our senior year. And long about springtime, there was our principal came into the assembly, and she said, made a little announcement. She said, the teachers training department in Pine River has got openings. I made it up there in nothing flat, and but we didn't have much in the way of learning. That is, I'm talking of psychology and so on. We had a little old red book, I remember the rats and the maze. That's about all I remember about it. But we must have absorbed something because we all graduated and went out to teach.
But you were not given a lot of courses in methods, teaching methods and evaluation. Yeah.
Actually, it was just kind of do it yourself,
Mm-hmm.
And my first year, I was 17 when I got my teacher's training. I started there in 1941,
Mm-hmm.
December 7th, the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
And how many students did you have that first year?
28.
How many?
28.
Oh my gosh.
First grade to 8th grade, and a spring kindergarten.
Wow. So they actually had kindergarten that year.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so
that's a lot of students, a lot of diversity in teaching.
Well, the thing is that children then learned
from each other
and from their books. Today, I have the feeling that children must be taught. There's a difference. And, we had at the most 15 minutes for a class.
I know. Wow.
And the teacher had to prepare all of those, put the instructions or the words to be studied on the board. Yeah, you had to be on top of it, every one of those. And you moved from one, to another. And in the meantime, these little kids sat at their desks and they learned. They learned by themselves, and they learned from each other. One nice thing about the rural school was that little kids had a preview because they listened in on the older kids' history and geography. And so it was kind of familiar to them when they got that far.
Oh, sure.
And then, not that first year, but I did, as I went out, I learned how to teach better every year, because when you make a mistake, you learn from it.
Hmm.
Well, one nice thing that teachers did, and it worked, if you had a youngster that maybe didn't know the multiplication tables, whatever, and is bothering his or her work, you give them the flashcards and have them take out the little kids and hold the cards up for the little kids. What a nice way to learn. And you really learn when you're teaching. And that was a real good review. We
You bet.
also would have a youngster that was a little slow at reading, take the little class out and listen to their reading. And in little tricks like that, the rural school had it all over on first grade in this room and second grade in this room. You see, the country school, you had to have a school that a child didn't have to walk any more than 1.5 miles.
Okay.
And so most of them walked. And in the winter, when it got really cold, sometimes their parents would bring them.
That's a long walk for some little kids.
Yeah, but it's healthy. My husband and I were having a beer in Leader when the school board came in, the Leader school board came in and asked me to teach school.
Huh.
I said, I don't, and that was something that is altogether different, because in those days, teachers did not go into a bar.
Bar. Yes.
Definitely.
Even
Well,
when I started teaching in 1970, that was
mhm,
frowned upon.
yeah, that's for sure. Well, anyway, they really wanted a teacher. And I said, I don't have a certificate. They told me you can get a permit to teach if you promise to get 2 credits every so many years. So I started teaching, and I never quit. And then I taught at Leader and Poplar School and Crescent School and Leader again, the 3 schools. Let's see, Poplar, Crescent. Oh, and I forgot Oakland. Oakland was further over west. It was 9 miles from where I was living, and also 3/4 miles down in the woods. And in the wintertime, you drove that to as far as you could drive, and you walked down into the woods. I put the thermometer down in the wintertime. It was really cold, by my desk, and I had my desk by the coldest spot in the room, and the thermometer registered 0 on the floor.
Wow. Now, when you were teaching in Leader and those other schools, did you have parents that helped you keep the buildings warm, or were you responsible for stoking them up and keeping them warm?
That was right in your contract. You
You had
had
to do that?
to build the fires, you had to sweep the floor. One school, you had to wash the toilet seats every month, even in
Every
the
month?
even in the winter. So
Really?
I would wash them on Friday night, and then Monday morning I'd get there and I'd go out and chip the ice off the seats.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now, were you burning coal in most of those buildings?
No wood.
All wood.
Yeah.
And then who cut the wood? Who cut the wood for the schools?
Well, the school board contracted it out to a farmer, and that was a little bit of extra money that the farmer got, bringing the wood, and it was all cut up. But the teacher and the children had to pile it in the wood room.
Okay.
And so we took about 2 or 3 afternoons to do that.
Okay.
And that was fun.
Now, when you taught in those schools, were they all first grade through 8th grade?
Yep. And a spring kindergarten.
And a spring kindergarten.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, I got better and better and more relaxed as the years went by, because then all these tricks that you learn about discipline. So I learned not to squeal when I opened my desk drawer and there was a snake in there. Kids are kids, you know.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure.
if you learn to get along like that and learn to go out and play ball with them, learn to listen to them, you know, those are things you learn by being out there with them.
Hmm.
And when you've got only 25, 28 kids, you learn to know them and they learn to know you. And
Now you had a local school board, but
yeah,
you had a kind of a regional level of superintendency, didn't you?
the superintendent had to come around to the school once a year at least. And that's about all they did.
And where did they come from?
Walker.
Walker?
Hmm. Yeah.
So that done by county then? In your case, you're in Cass
Township.
County?
School district.
Oh, by school district.
See, like in Cass County, those 4 schools were all in Cass County and they had to be close so the kids could walk. You know, you take like Oakland. I went right by a farmer's house. I could have picked those kids up, but they were all doing chores at that time and getting breakfast. I had to be in school and get the fire going. And Oakland was a cold school, as I said. And these 2 little boys, they were first grade and second grade, and there was some kids older, but these 2 little ones, they would be so cold when they got there. So I pushed a bookcase over next to the stove. They had those great big old jackets around the stove. Do you remember those?
Mm-hmm.
And I put a few books on top. And when those 2 little boys got there, because they never missed school, and I lifted them up, set them on those books, hung their feet over the jacket. And I said, don't move around. And they never fell in. But
That's a good thing.
that was, I got them warmed up, you know, because they were so cold when they got there. Also, their lunch buckets froze out in the coat hall. And we'd all bring their coats in after the last recess, and so they'd be warm when they put them on. And their lunches, I swept off the top of the stove and toasted their sandwiches.
So what time did your school day start and what time did it finish?
We had to be there as teachers at 8 o'clock. We rang the 8:30 bell. I never knew why we rang that bell, but we rang the bell at 8:30. I assume it was to tell the kids to get started on the way to school. And then school started at 9. We had a 15-minute morning recess. We had an hour at noon, excepting in the coldest part of the winter, we had a half an hour. And then we let school out at 3:30.
And what happened if you were sick?
You just didn't get sick.
You didn't miss any school. You just kept
Oh,
going.
yes, you did, but you had to make up your days.
Okay.
And you had to have some way of telling each family that you weren't going to be in school that day.
And how did you do that? That must have been a challenge.
It was. There was one time that I had to do that, and I went around to each family and said, there won't be any school today.
Wow.
And then as soon as you got, and you know, the parents were so cooperative. They were, when something like that happened, or you had a child that was sick that you had to stay home, or some other family emergency, they were so good. They would say, all right, you just tell us when school's going to start again. They supported their school. The school was a part of their life. We had 1 or 2 programs. We had a spring picnic. If the parents wondered about something, they came right to the school and asked you. And they were, you know, we've lost a lot of things when we went into town and consolidated. We lost the collectiveness of the community.
Hmm.
And today I don't think I could go back and teach today. I guess I would, and I would teach much as I did. Like I told my dad when I was going to be a teacher, I said, Dad, what will I do if the children don't obey me? Well, he said, you take a big stick and you hit the first one. and, and then he said, and then you say, now, that was easy. The next time I'll be harder. Well, of course, he didn't mean that, but he meant
Yeah.
your attitude, your
Yeah.
attitude. You had to get them in your hands. But I never had trouble in the country schools with discipline.
Now, when you gave feedback to parents, did you have parent-teacher meetings, or did you do that in writing at the rural school?
Well, we hardly ever saw the parents unless there was a problem. And in that case, they came to the school and said, Miss Johnson, can I talk to you about Johnny? And that's the way it was. But
Okay.
we had good, I just felt like we had a good relationship.
hmm More trust maybe too, huh?
Mhm.
Back then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And times have changed. And I realized that the country schools couldn't possibly give even the machinery, like, microscopes and
Oh,
windows and
classroom equipment?
yeah, we
Yeah.
couldn't possibly, and we didn't have
Just
room
didn't
for it.
have it.
You didn't have the money for it. You didn't have any place for it.
hmm
We had to consolidate. I know that,
hmm
but I do regret the togetherness that you had in the country, and you took what you had and you worked with it and you grew up. Every one of my youngsters that I have had in school that I know about are responsible citizens. Mhm.
So how did you spend your summers, Ruth, when you were still teaching at the country school? Did you go back to get more training in the summers?
Yeah. You see, the thing was, in those days, you didn't, I didn't go to the campus at Bemidji at first. They sent teachers out, like to Staples or Brainerd or Park Rapids or Pine River. And so teachers, we would go there and take those summer classes. And I discovered that I like to learn. And so I took night classes and summer classes. And of course, living on the farm like we did, we had all the farm chores to do too. One little boy grew up to be a big boy. And whenever I'd see him, he'd say, yeah, Ruthie was my teacher. She always told me not to get smart, and so I never did.
Oh,
And
that's a good line.
yeah, and all these youngsters that come back to me, and they do, I am so proud of them, and they are so good. And we still have a good, I never had a youngster that didn't like me. When I recently, well, 3 years ago, I was 95 at the time, 95, 90 at the time. I went uptown, I walked in the bar, and my sight is bad. I'm legally blind. So I stepped in the door, it's dark in there, and I always stop a little bit to get my eyes oriented. Somebody in there said, there's a lady that I've loved all my life.
Hmm.
Just to be funny, I said, well, which one are you? It was it was one of those little boys that I put up on top of the stove,
hmm Oh, really?
yeah, he was celebrating his 75th birthday. I had a picture sent to me. My son sent it to me when I taught at Poplar. Every one of those youngsters on that picture are dead, except
Wow.
3.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I just wish I could just give the knowledge that I finally got, because I didn't have it at first. You have to
Yes.
work for it. I don't have any regrets, except I wish I'd been a little smarter, a little quicker.
We can all say that.
Yeah.
We're gonna have our panel come up here now, and when they get sitting down, I'll tell you a little bit about them, and we'll go from there. I've got a few questions I want to ask them. Later on, if you'd like, we're gonna open it up so you can ask questions. If you want to add something to what they've said, you can. See what I mean? You saw it, didn't you? That's terrible to do that to me. And later on, as I said, we'll be able to ask some questions, or if you've got something that you want to add. But I'm going to get them all situated. And I'm going to introduce you. First, I'm going to start on the other end. And many of you recognize Gordon Martin, and you also recognize that he probably wasn't a teacher. He was smarter, he didn't have to teach. But he attended Sunrise Country School. That's up near the Casino Church. Many of you in the audience know where that was. Went first through the 7th grade, and then he attended the 8th grade through 12th grade in Pillager. And his wife, Gail, is she here? She also taught, where at? Over here, okay. She also taught in the country school. You taught south of Staples, I believe, right? Yeah, so she also taught in the country school. One of the reasons that I wanted a student here is because if these teachers start talking about things that just ain't so, I figured a student would be able to contradict that, so. Okay, next in line, we have Mrs. Rowe. And Mrs. Earl started teaching in Deer Creek in 1952 after finishing teacher school in Staples. She later taught in Scandia Valley in a one-room school there, subbing a lot there, probably full-time sometimes. She was known there as the hot lunch program because she would make hot soup for the students, because she'll tell you later that some of them just didn't have adequate food, and she was going to make sure they did. So she was the hot lunch program all by herself. After raising her children, she returned to teaching, and this time she was in town in the Pillager School, and she continued her education during summers and evenings, just as Mrs. Bolden did, and she got her bachelor's degree in 1974. So we're going to get, as soon as I introduce everybody, we're going to ask a few questions of these people and see if they're going to tell us the truth.
I would need my purse because I need students.
It's just there, but Janine's going to bring it. Oh, it is there. Okay, never mind. Sorry I blew up. All right, she's always telling me stuff.
Yep.
Mrs. Peets, like many country school teachers, started out with a certificate after attending one-year teacher's training. Rosemarie started in teaching in North Kentucky. That was the first one, correct? It's not the North Kentucky you see out there on the wall, the North Kentucky that was here, because that one was built in about 1901, and she swears she was not around. But she taught, they rebuilt the North Kentucky later, and that was her first place she taught. She went from there, she went to Hazel Dell, which, again, nice connection. She moved up by leader, and she taught, well, my brother's here, but she didn't teach him, but she taught my sisters there, Marilyn and Margaret. So she continued training through night school and summer school as well, and she received her bachelor's degree in 1964. She taught for 6 years in the country school system at Hazel Dell, North Kentucky, and Coolidge. before she then moved into the Pillager school system as well, teaching the first grade, the first time they had a first grade class, or kindergarten class, I mean, and that was held in the Baptist church at the time. Am I correct on that one? Okay.
Yes.
All right. She spent a total of 40 years teaching grade school children. I think it's kind of ironic. I think if you looked at it, we probably have about somewhere between 150 and 160 years of teaching here. And if you thought conservatively of about 25 students per year, that's a bunch. I think it's just remarkable what they've done. And last but not least, and you already got a bunch of her bio from the video, but Mrs. Bolden attended teachers training in Pine River, as she said. She taught in Osakis at age 17. And I think you said you had a 15-year-old was your oldest student.
My oldest boy was 15.
15, by the way.
Scared of him.
Because I want to be careful, you two have to share this mic.
Okay.
You two have to share this mic. Did you learn that?
How close do we have to get?
Pretty close to it. Can I say? Yes, not much I can say.
Very, very strict my first year because I was really afraid of that fifth grade, the 15-year-old boy. And he was kind of a smart aleck.
Huh.
But
Imagine that.
I found out you had to be a little smarter than the kids.
So after teaching 25 years in the country schools, Crescent, Oakland, Poplar, and later, she finished her teaching career in Brainerd School System at Baxter and Lincoln School. So that's our panel. So let's give them a big hand just for being here. I'm going to get over to you in a minute, but I'm going to ask them a couple questions first here, Gordon. So Betty, when you were teaching in Deer Creek, you were in a one-room school, but it was much more modern than most of the one-room schools. And make sure you get close to the mic and tell us what was different about that school.
Yes, Deer Creek school was a lot more modern in some ways, because in 1952, Deer Creek Country School already had inside chemical bathrooms and a water fountain. And they still had the old outside toilet that the kids would use often at recess time and so on. But there were just different things that were more modern there than some schools.
And one of the tricky parts was it had an indoor bathroom, but it was a single bathroom. So part of the work you had to do was to make sure they kept track of who went in and who came out, right?
Put initials on the board before they went down.
Put the board behind it.
Mrs. Peets, when you were teaching in Coolidge, there was something quite different about the student population at Coolidge one year. Would you tell us about that? And make sure you get pretty close to the mic.
Yes, I will. But first, I would like to say Betty and I are very nervous. You can give us 40, 60 kids, and it doesn't bother us at all. But you're grown-ups. And I remember being in college, and I was shy, very backward, and one college professor told me, when you have to get up in front of adults, just think in your mind, close your eyes, and suppose that you're out in a big garden, and those are all cabbage heads. So you're going to be cabbage heads.
I You didn't explain what was peculiar about the population of that school then. You got off track there.
As far as Coolidge School, I'm not really sure. I looked up records. At one time, I had 32 students. At another time, I had only 28. But out of those 32 students, I only had, they were all of the last name Hines. Hines. The other students, I recall there were 4 other students, and one of their mothers was also Hines. Imagine.
First name?
Putting them in alphabetical order.
Mrs. Bolden, you mentioned the rats in the maze. Was that part of your training?
Well, we had that little red psychology book. And our teacher she had been teaching, by the way, in Hawaii. And when the war started coming up, she came back. She was over 60 years old. And so she hadn't taken much psychology. So we had the book. And in that book, and I don't remember who the author was of the book, but anyway, they had a maze, a little cage with tracks around, and they'd put food over here, and the rats would go and they'd find their way to that food. And when they found the food, he'd ding a little bell, this guy that was writing the book. And after a while, it got so that and they would salivate. They'd get ready to eat, like your mouth waters. Well, after a while, he got so he'd ding the bell and they'd salivate. And it'd run over there. And that was part of our psychology teaching is reward. That's about all I remember about that book.
Gordon Martin, before I forget, I'm not going to ask you a question yet. I'm going to give you a chance to ask your question. You had sent me a text, you're curious about a location of a certain school. And what I want you to do is ask the question so that these people can be thinking about it, and when we get done here, they can explain on the map what you're asking. And get close to the mic if you would, please.
District 23 was our district, and that was in May Township in Cass County, halfway between Motley and Villager, and went north quite a few miles. But there was 10 schools, and I can name every one of them in the District 23 in May Township. These schools were all in May Township. Wheelot, the Dewitt School was over by Dewitt Roberts, Birch Hill, Bridgman, Fairview, May, Taft, North Kentucky, Sunrise, Oleander, and then we had the merger between Motley and Villager, and County Road 35 was the dividing point. But my question that it's always been a puzzle to me, I didn't know, I'm sure there's people here that do know, between the Gulswick Farm and the town of Villager, Wheelock was to the west there, but was there any schools, I'm sure there was some maybe in Sylvan Township between Gulswick's Farm and Villager? That's my question.
Okay, and I'll have some questions for you in just a little bit. All right, we're back to Mrs. Earl. As a teacher, what were some of the differences you noticed between country schools or rural schools and the in-town classes where you had one grade, one age? rather than multiples?
In country school.
We need the mic.
Interesting to see
Sorry.
students from the lower, okay. In country school, it was interesting to see the students from the lower classes listening and watching one of the higher students and try to understand their lesson. Sometimes several grades then would work on something together. In town classrooms, it was sometimes at their recess, there would be times to discuss a problem with another grade teacher across the hall, like fourth grade might be across from me if I was doing third or whatever. And we often talked about some problem that had happened that day with their student or the student that I was having. And a lot of times we had a nickname for the student so that no one else would know who we were talking about, because maybe the other kids would hear that and they might tell this or that student that, you know, teacher said you did this or that. So we used nicknames a lot. Sometimes we remember those nicknames to today, although I can't remember something else that I should remember. It was interesting though, either way, and I enjoyed both country and town so very, very much. And I'm thankful for all you people that show your interest in coming in this. Thank you.
Mrs. Peets, you taught both country and in town. Which one worked best for you in your teaching style? Which did you prefer and why?
Country school, 100%. There's just something about a country school that you're a big family. They become so close to you that you are like family. And I only taught grades 1 through 6. 1 year, my sister was supposed to go to Staples School, but she had rheumatic fever, so she couldn't attend Staples School. So for 1 year, I had 1 7th grader, which was really interesting.
But country school was your favorite? That was your favorite? Country school? Yeah, really. You preferred country school? All right.
I've enjoyed every place though, and it's so much fun to see students years and years later, even like this last year at the fair or something. It's just so interesting to see them. Maybe they're bringing a grandchild with them or something to introduce them and say, you know, that I was their teacher. So, I don't know, country school, town school, both. I really like them both.
Now, Gordon, I'm back to you. You went 7 years in country school, then you finished out your 12 years and graduated from Pillager. Which did you like best and why? Which fit you best?
Well, school was really hard for me, especially those younger grades. And the nice part about it was John Solers had, many of you know the Solers family, there was 14 kids in that family. And every one of those kids, school was easy for those kids. And we had the bench seats, and Martha was in my grade, and Martha could help me with my work, and I did enjoy that. And yes.
All right. Plus you got to have more sports and things when you got into town.
Yeah, when we moved into town, not that I never was that good at sports. I tried a lot, but I never did. But I do have something to tell you. Dad had a thrashing machine, Bird Martin, my dad was, and anyway, back in 1952, we were thrashing at one of the farms there, and Albert Peets and I were out in the field, and Albert was hauling bundles, and I suppose I was fooling around, I don't know. But anyway, I said to Albert, I said, you know, I understand the school mom, who was Rosie Peets, who wasn't Rosie Peets, of course, at that time, but Rosie is gonna room it at your place. Yes, Albert says, and I understand she's very nice too.
And then there's the rest of the story.
I think those of us
It's interesting to note one thing. My mother did teach at Crescent School too. She married Ferd Martin in 1930, and Dad was on my farm, which is my granddad's farm, and I'm there now. I've been there for 65 years. And anyway, my dad wasn't ready for his farm yet over by Casino. They had bought it, but he wasn't. So my mother did teach at Crescent School 1 year.
And she was my first grade teacher.
This would be a small world, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is all news to me.
I think those of us who were fortunate enough to attend a country school as a child, it was so much easier to teach in a one-room school. You were already
Familiar with the program, yeah.
I had a little problem when I moved into town school.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
One. Anyway, we had 15-minute classes in the country school, if that. You know, we combined like 3rd and 4th grade health class and so on, combined them, you know. When I moved into town, all of a sudden here I had 40 minutes for reading, 40 minutes for math, 40 minutes for social. What in the world am I going to do with all that time? Then I discovered the teacher's manuals. They were very helpful.
You mentioned in the video, you mentioned that you went through the books, first grade book, second grade book. So just explain that, how that worked.
Well, you see, the thing was, we didn't have very much material in the country schools. And I had learned to read before I went to school. So the first year I read my way through the first reader, the second reader. The second year I read my way through the third and the fourth. Therefore, when I normally would have been in 3rd grade, I was in 5th grade reading. Then we moved. Bad choice. Because I was put into 5th grade math, which I didn't know anything about, or history, or I can remember the history book. And there was a little story of Christopher Columbus, and there he sat on a thing that you tie the boat up to, you know? And I thought he was just sitting on a stump. And I read that first page, and the teacher came and asked me questions. I didn't know. I could read it, but I didn't assimilate what it was saying. And that's why I learned to memorize. And a lot of things I didn't understand till I went to college. Oh, that's what that meant.
And it was up to the teacher to move you forward or hold you back?
What are you going to do with a kid? I mean, you didn't have very much. You had newspapers, you had catalogs, you had a few library books, you had color crayons that wore out real quick, you know, and you just did what you could with them. And if you had to move them ahead, you moved them ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. But you know, there were a lot. I'm going to interrupt you, David. I've got to say this. My son, Jimmy, had polio in the last polio epidemic. And he was out of school from September till January. And he was down in Minneapolis. Then when he got back, he could not go to school because he couldn't be out in the snow. When it came to be Easter and the ground was showing up, he could go back to school. But he couldn't run and he had to have a nap after lunch. God bless the country school. The teacher put down a blanket behind a big old stove and Jimmy had a nap every afternoon after lunch. And he also played kitten ball. We couldn't run, but the kids all vied for their turn to run for him. So, but that's what we did. We just, the country school, you did what you had to do with what you had. And we reached out and, you know, you had kids that had a broken leg or something like that, you just adapted to it. We could do it. We could do it now. If we would just look around a little bit and try. I'll shut up.
I bet. Mrs. Earl, she threw me off there with that. Oh yeah, here it is. When I was in school, I sort of liked recess best. I attended a one-room country school where Mrs. Pete's leader taught. Well, no, she did not. I didn't go to Hazeldale because they closed that one before I got there. I went to Meadowbrook. But anyway, Mrs. Rowe, for recess, were you out with the kids during recess, or were you in getting ready for what happened in the afternoon?
Well, the kids were always happy when it was recess, that's for sure. But for recess, I would first just step out in the playground and see if everybody was getting along and how things were going. And I would only be there for a couple minutes. Then I would go back into the school and do some other things that needed to be done. Like I would put a little more wood on the fire if it was cold weather. And I would get a good drink of cold water because I'd been talking so much and, you know, throat felt dry and all this and that. I would visit the bathroom. Then I would look at the next things that we were going to do when they would come in, and I would lay the next lesson in the center of my desk so that I would be ready for that, because you never knew for sure what was going to happen in between the time when they're coming in from recess and when you're going to actually start, you know, teaching the class. But there were so many good times from it anyway. They enjoyed recess, and it was good. I liked it when they came in and when they settled down. When they settled down after recess, of course, they were always kind of hyper, but they would settle down and get back to work again. So it was good.
And Gordon, you want to comment on recess?
To be honest with you, I stayed in a lot of races. I had well, actually after Sunrise, I went 7 years there, and we had 5 different teachers. That kind of tells you what kind of school it was. We had, it wasn't the easiest for the teachers up there at Sunrise. But yeah, the recesses came, and that was fun. That was fun when we had recesses.
Just a clarification, you stayed in because they wouldn't let you go out because you malfunctioned somewhere?
My aunts, there are 2 of them were my aunts, and they had one thing in mind. They wanted me ready to go into town, and I don't know how many are sitting out there that remember, in order to go into town, we had to pass the 7th and 8th grade exam in our country school. Did you have that too?
Yep.
We did in Cass County.
Yeah, we did.
You did, yeah. We had to pass, you couldn't go in, move on in the 7th and 8th grade unless you passed that exam. And of course, that was a fear all through the year to get ready for that exam to take.
So you were in studying, not being punished.
I did make it.
Okay.
I'm glad I clarified that one.
I'm glad I clarified that. And Mrs. Peets, if I remember having a conversation with you, you liked recess because you liked it going on.
I loved recess. I'm from a family of 8 kids, 5 brothers, 2 sisters. So comes noon hour, we eat our lunch. I'm not gonna miss out on a good softball game. No way. So we played ball, we played anti-over. We did some crazy games, but we had fun.
I got it.
Oh, pum pum pull away, of course.
We did a few crazy things, because I think the teacher disappeared in the school once in a while, probably being prepared for the afternoon session. And I remember going across the road, and we cut out these, they looked like slingshots, you know, just a slingshot. And then we cut off some willows, and we used to take those slingshots and pull them back on the willow, and then shoot them at each other. And it wasn't very accurate, so we really never hurt anybody, but we had a lot of fun doing that, and I'm pretty sure the teacher never knew that we had done that. So we probably wouldn't have been allowed to continue doing that, but we did. Parents, how were supportive were parents? You mentioned that, Mrs. Bolden, in your interview, in your deal there. Was it always the case? Did you have any that were kind of problematic?
In town, I had two different mothers that came. And what, is that on?
Yeah, it's working.
And they were very uppity. One of them even said a prayer over me. It didn't hurt. But, you know, it was just a misunderstanding in both cases. In the one case, the little girl lied and said she'd studied for her test, and I said, well, here's a test list. And I read the questions, she didn't know any of them, so you see that was solved. And the other one was, I remember now. We were coming up to the first report card, and this little girl was very shy and she was scared. And she was crying to her mother that she was going to fail. Well, this was 5th grade in Lincoln School in Brainerd, and we had just started long division. Now, when we started a new concept, we always graded the papers, but we didn't keep that first set of grades because they had to make mistakes in order to learn. But she, you know, was really having a bad time with long division, so she thought she was going to fail. And in came mother. And I said, well, let's just look. And I took her report card down because I always made my report cards out a week early. And I gave her the report card, and she was just amazed that her little girl was doing quite well. And it was just a misunderstanding. So that was 2. In the country, you didn't have any trouble with parents. I didn't. I had one boy that said, my pa's going to come out here this afternoon tonight. He's going to bring a pitchfork and he's going to fix you. And I said, I will be here until 5 o'clock. He never showed up. I think the kids were all afraid to go home and say they had trouble in school.
Gordon, did you have a favorite teacher in the years you were in country school?
Yeah, she was the one that slapped me. Alice Larber was my favorite teacher.
Yeah. You knew you had it coming, I take it.
Yeah, I had it coming.
Yeah. But she was a good teacher.
She was a very good teacher, but she had twin girls at home, and she thought she was going to come and teach that year and drop her girls off over at the North Kentucky School. And twin girls, and one of them ended up with pneumonia. And so she decided at that point she was no longer going to teach. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Mrs. Earl. I'm not going to ask you that one. I'm skipping that one. Music. Music was part of the curriculum, correct? Were you highly talented in music? And how did you deal with that?
Music was really, really challenging for me because I do not have a good singing voice. I haven't studied a lot of music things, but I was thankful for some of the students and any of the parents at that school. And so often we talked about and learned the words from a lot of the songs, especially patriotic things and so on. And there was a couple of the students that were really good singers, had a really good voice, and they would sing, and they might go through a song a couple times, and then we'd all sing it together, and we had more fun doing things like that than we actually learned, say, reading notes or some of the other things that maybe we should have learned. But we had a real good time anyway, and the students were all really happy with it, so.
Right. How about Amy, the other, are you all musically talented and inclined, or did you struggle with it?
We just sang every morning.
Did you have a book?
We had a book, yeah.
A regular songbook you'd sing on it? How about you, Rosemary, same thing?
But that's the only thing. We,
Yeah.
how can they teach if you don't have a singing voice, you don't have a piano or an organ, mouth organ maybe, you know, couldn't do it.
Mrs. Beats, was music a challenge for you as well?
No, not really, but it seems like she's saying there was always some child in the classroom that loved to sing. We had the golden book, and like Betty said, if one child would, so we got the melody, then we'd memorize the words and sang the same songs like Yankee Doodle Dandy, patriotic sounds, Bill Brogan's Goat. They were fun, but it also helped you to memorize. So you still have them to this day.
Sure.
They're in your computer.
Gordon, as a student, were they burning wood where you were at Sunrise? Were they burning wood then, or
Pardon?
for heat? Were they burning wood or fuel?
In our school, it was the same as Ruth Bolden's there. Yeah, it was all wood, and it's the same principle. The wood was contracted, and there was always farmers that needed the money, had families to support and whatnot. And we'd carry in the wood on Friday, and probably Friday afternoon, last recess, and so it'd stay in the school over the weekend, and then the teacher would come back on Monday morning, just like Ruth said.
Now, did they put you boys to work to bring the wood in?
Oh, yeah. The boys.
Warm twice.
Well, I think the girls helped too.
Yeah. All right. When you first started teaching, Mrs. Roll, do you remember what you made? How much money?
Yes, $2,025 in Deer Creek in 1952.
In 1952. I'm not sure if it was accurate or not, but I looked it up to see what $2,000 would be worth in today's money, and it'd be about $17,000 today, in today's money. So that's not much money.
$2,025.
Yeah.
But I was thankful for it.
Yeah, it'd be about 17,000 equivalent, 17 to 20,000. So, Mrs. Bolden, what did you make your first year?
Prepared, yeah.
I made $80 and for 8 months, and I paid $18 a month for room and board.
$80 a month.
$80 a month, and 18 of that had to be paid where I stayed.
Now, if you look out in the entry there where you first came in, there is a contract hanging up there. It's one of her contracts, and that was a little later on. That was in 44, I think, and something like that. And she made then the handsome sum of $2,000 or $1,000, $125 a month.
That's 50 cents an hour.
Quarterly.
Money went further than it did.
When my mother was teaching up at
50
Crescent
bucks to fill your
School,
gas tank.
anyway, she had the room and board, just like Ruth said. But that was in 1930, and in 31, they cut the teachers. My mother said that they cut these teachers remember that probably. They cut the teachers' salaries as we was in a real depression in 30 and 31 in the area. They cut the teachers' salaries in half, and my mother said that you couldn't, she was paying room and board, you couldn't stay away from home hardly and live on that.
These ladies were just children then. Just so you know, Gordon, don't age them. Children at that point. So one of the things, back to you, Gordon, and then I'm going to ask, it's going to relate to all of them, but one of the things I remember from country school, there were a few school occasions. There was a school play. Did y'all have a school play? Christmas time, there was school songs in the Christmas program. But one of them that I thought was kind of fun was in the fall. We had to go out and help rake the leaves up in a pile. We'd burn them, and we roasted some hot dogs. Did you get a chance to do that?
No, but I do remember the plays quite well. We had the Christmas program. And the music was mentioned a little while ago. A couple of our teachers had organ, a little pump organ, and they would bring that to school to help with the music.
You went to a really modern school up there in Sunrise, didn't you?
We had a lot of rock, didn't we, Dave? I see Dave Warren sitting back. That's about all we had there. Well, we did have outdoor toilets, but we had to walk, a quarter of a mile over to Wilmer Horns to get our water. Some schools were lucky. You were lucky if you had a well, but we didn't have a well.
Ruth, I think I remember you saying that you had to carry water into, was it Oakland, that you had to carry the water in?
No, we had to thaw the pump out every morning. And then we had to bring water down from the neighbors, that's what we carried in. And we warmed that up on the stove, and then we went out and thawed out. That was really a chore. Yeah.
So, Mrs. Peets, did you get to rake the yard and stuff, or did the kids rake the yard and have a wiener roast, anything like that, when you were in school?
Yes, usually over the summer there would be branches and whatnot on the schoolyard. So in September, that was part of my janitorial work. But the kids helped with it. We'd pick up and make piles, and then the neighbor closest to the school would haul away most of it, but he always left enough so we could have a big wiener roast.
Now, I'm leading up to something here. Mrs. Bolden, did you ever have anything go awry while you were having wiener roasts?
You can go home, Dave. I had 3 fires. Yep. In Poplar, a little boy went over, we were going to rake yard, and he went over to the neighbors to borrow rakes, because that's what we did, and he decided to see if the leaves would start. And then it was coming right toward the schoolhouse. Wow. Fortunately, that neighbor was sawing wood. He had a wood sawing, so they had about 6 men there, and they came and put the fire out. Well, then in Oakland, I learned something. And so when we raked yard and we had our wiener roast, we put it on the pitcher's mound. And And I stayed there until 5:30 and watched that it was all out. I went home, I came back in the morning, okay. Come to the first recess, the kids wanted to play ball. Well, you have to move those ashes from the pitcher's mound. So they went out and moved it. It was a dry time. Those ashes were hot enough, they moved it out so that this was let's see, noon hour. And they moved the ashes out to the edge of the yard. And one child went out to go to the bathroom and come running back in, fire, fire, spontaneous combustion. So we put that one out ourselves. Well, then the last one, it was at Creston School, and I did the same thing, but the breeze came up and scattered the hot ashes, and Bob Flansburgh came and put it out.
So you had saviors in every case.
I'm a firebug.
Yeah. Mrs. Peets, I don't think I asked you, how much did you get paid? You taught in Deer Creek your first year. What did you get paid in Deer Creek? Do you recall?
I'm a little jealous of Betty. She had indoor toilets.
Yeah.
And she got paid more. I had outdoor biffies, and I only got $1,800 a year. But you know, that comes to $9, $10 a week, and I thought I was rich.
And you had a couple of special duties, if I remember right, in your contract. You had to clean the curtains twice a year? Was that you? Somebody had to clean the curtains a couple times a year.
Clean the what?
Clean the curtains.
Oh, yes, that were janitorial duties. We had to put little janitorial duties. We had to put lime in the toilets twice a week. We had to sweep the floors, the whole classroom, every day. Wash desktops at least twice a week. I hauled the water from home in what we called a shotgun bucket back then. So I would fill that with water and then haul the water in, pour it into one of those big round, it was supposed to keep it cold, but it didn't. And we had to wash the curtains twice a year. I suppose most of that was smoke from the stove, but you know, the kids never noticed that they were smoking. And to tell you the truth, I didn't either. I had to report to one of the board members when our wood supply got low. And I had somebody out in the hall before we came in said, "What did you use for toilet paper?" Well, I remember Sears and Roebuck catalog, but in the fall, when the mothers would be canning peaches, those nice, soft, Kleenexy wrappings on the peaches, the parents would gather those up and bring them to school. We made them last as long as we could.
The life of a rural school teacher, wasn't it glamorous? But it's remarkable to me, and I just, one of the reasons that I was hoping we could do this program, it's remarkable to me to think how complicated it was to teach all those grades, all those kids at different levels, all the things you had to do, including janitorial services, recess, discipline, without a superintendent, well, once a year maybe, no principal to back you up, not a colleague teacher in the next room to back you up, which I think you all said was one of the nice things about going to town, is now you had people that would help back you up. So I just think it's remarkable, and I wanted to make sure that we got this program on so we could hear from them. A couple of things that's kind of interesting, I think, is when you look at what a school cost back then, the Fairview School, and might have to go to Norman on this one. Is the Fairview School the one that ended up in Madden's and then up in Nisswa? Yes. Okay, so that one's still up in Nisswa. If you go to the Pioneer Village in Nisswa, that's the Fairview School. And so I have a question. Who went to Fairview? You did. Okay. They had the stove right up in front in the middle. Was it in the front in the middle, or was it back in the back corner? Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you teach with a big stove like that, but they have it kind of in a strange place up there. I was curious about that, whether that was the case or not. I think what I'd like to do is see if you've got any questions. You have any questions for our panel? Because we got many years. Go ahead, sir. You got to speak up loud, though.
When you start your class every day, do you say and have the children say the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes.
The Pledge of Allegiance. The
Yes.
question was, and I'll repeat the question, some of you might not hear it. The question was, did you repeat the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of your class? And
Yes.
you're saying absolutely. Okay.
We did not have Bible reading in my school. I don't know if you people did or not. But my dad and mother, they had Bible reading also
Okay. In their school.
in the school.
Yeah. Okay. Another question was over here. Yeah. I'll repeat it.
Mine was the same question that he asked, but I remember in about the 4th and 5th and 6th grade, something like that, at the school here in Pillager, we not only said the Pledge of Allegiance, but we sang of My Country's 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty. You know, I don't remember the name of that, but
I think that was part of their music training. I think that's what they relied on. That was part of it.
I do
I
remember
will
that there
say-
being one of the things that we had to do at the beginning of the
I
first
will
class.
say that I've had 2 different families throughout the years who did not, their religion didn't allow them to say the pledge.
Really?
And we just allowed that. They just
let it
didn't
be.
say the pledge.
You said it and they could skip it.
We all said it and they sat there and listened.
Okay.
You know, we didn't infringe on anybody's rights.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Were there any American Indian kids in your schools?
Anybody have any Native Americans, Native Indians in school?
We couldn't tell. We all looked the same. Everybody was tanned when they came to school.
Mrs. Rowe, did you have any Native Americans in your classes?
I didn't, but I have a daughter that taught at,
Oh, yeah.
I had a daughter that taught at a school where there were Native American children.
But that was up on the rest. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? I think I saw somebody raising their hand over this way, didn't I? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Didn't you say your first day of teaching was?
He was a teacher.
So at that time, did they do the pledge of salute?
When you were teaching, question is, when you were doing the pledge, did they do this or did they salute? Which did they do?
We did this.
Okay.
Okay, because I know that it wasn't changed, so during World War II, this was too nasty, like.
Oh, some places maybe that's the case, yeah. They didn't want to look like little Germans. Yeah. Okay. Well, and that's probably the case because she was, of those here, she was the only one that started, and that was the day of Pearl Harbor. I thought that that was one of the reasons that they declared a day of infamy, but apparently it was because Ruthie had started teaching at 17.
When Pearl Harbor happened, all the schools pitched in. The children brought, their mothers washed out soup cans, took out the bottom end of it and smashed them and brought them, we collected them. We collected the tinfoil from cigarettes and gum. And the school board would take them to the county seat about once a month. We did the teachers, we were just told, I suppose by the county superintendent, you have to make out the ration books. So when we were doing rationing that fall, that winter, we stayed after school and made out all the ration books for our district. Now that was kind of smart because where else would you know, where you know almost everybody, so there'd be no cheaters. So they came to our school, we knew, or their neighbors knew who they were, and we made out the ration books. I had one, I was 17. We didn't have any much help for odd problems, heavy problems, deep down problems. You had to figure them out yourself. I had one older couple, they were probably in their 50s. They came in late one day for the ration books. They were scared to death of the federal government. The husband had, well, they had a child, an incest child. And the daughter had died, and so the father, the grandfather, father, and the mother raised this child. What are we going to do to sign her up for ration books? They were afraid. They had to come in, and they had to rely on me. 17 years old. So I said, I don't know if this is smarter or not, but this is what I said. I think the federal government has got a lot more to worry about than your little girl. We'll just sign her up. And we did. And I hope she had a happy life. I'd only taught there 1 year. I have no idea. She would be in her 70s or 80s now. But that was quite a problem for me to think out in 5 minutes.
I have one last question, and I think, Ruth, you had mentioned one of your video, but I want to go to Betty. You've had students come back and talk to you and thank you. Can you think of anyone that was particularly meaningful to you, someone that came back after the years?
There were a lot of them. One boy was a rascal in school. He brought his 2 kids back years later, and he told me, I just wanted them to meet my teacher. I must have done something right.
Mrs. Peets, did you have any come back that were quite meaningful to you?
I think of one particular incident. I went to country school until April, and then we moved, and I had to ride a bus for the first time, and I got car sick, so I always had a girlfriend. And for a child to change schools it was horrendous for me. You walk into a classroom.
And they looked at you.
Yeah.
Everybody looked at you.
They look at me like I'm weird, and I probably was. I was a country girl, and not the finest of clothes. I remember the teacher had a fifth finger, a short finger beside her little finger, and she had her nails painted bright red. I had never seen that before. And she, according to me, was dressed to the hills. I walked into that classroom and Miss Stromberg said, "This is our new student. She'll be here for the rest of the year." And she said, her name is Rosemary Carlson. Take a seat. I was lost from day one. So when I became a teacher, I vowed that would never happen to a student of mine. I had a little boy, if I remember at about 4th grade, who came in December. He had a speech impediment. He had trouble walking. I knew what was going to happen. The parents had talked to me ahead of time and explained all of his difficulties. So, before he came the first day of school, I told all of my students, I have a problem and I think you can help me. So we sat in a circle and I explained how someone feels when they have to change schools in the middle of the year. And it was time for the kids to go home after school, and the kids weren't going home, so parents began arriving. So they got in on the conversation. I always thought we're all created equal. Do unto others as you would want them do unto you. My students live by that. So I'm saying, tomorrow morning, Benny, not his real name, arrived having difficulty walking, having difficulty speaking, and we had our plan. We put ourselves in his shoes. The students were just glad to do this. And this child and his parents were just overwhelmed because he had had trouble every school he went to. So when we went out to play ball, Benny batted, and he was a good batter, but it took him a long time to get ready to bat. And when he hit the ball, we all cheered. Somebody ran for him, and he became the hit of our school.
Mrs. Rowe, have you had any students come back that made you feel especially good when they came back and talked to you?
I am so thankful every time I see a student that I had before, and it's really fun when 70 years later, I still have frequent contact with one of my students from then. And there are some here even tonight who I taught years ago. I am thankful each time I see them and of the good times that we had when they were in my class. One thing I kind of would like to say a little bit about is 70 years ago, when I taught in Deer Creek, there was a girl in my 4th grade class. I still see her very frequently. One of the events that I remember from that school, though, is that several parents came together one day to see me and thanked me about some things that had happened there before that weren't happening that year. Deer Creek recess times, there had been a lot of fights that were started by one of the older boys. And I kept him in a few times at recess, but then I got a little static on that. And so then I had him look at me and read 4 lines that I had written, 4 short lines that I had written. I had him look at me and read them before he could go out for recess. The lines that he had to read were, "I will be good. I will try hard. I will not fight in our schoolyard." Parents were so glad that I made him read that and that he had promised not to fight with the other boys. Well, parents were thankful for it, but the other boys in the school were really thankful too, because he was pretty rough on them. It's so good though to see students from long ago, and even this year at Pillager Fair, and that was another thing that I'd like to talk to my students about, is take things to your county fairs and so on. Support your community. But I see people at the fair, even this year, and a tall young man, or no, tall middle-aged man will walk up and they will have a grandchild with them, and they'll walk over, well, one of them walked over and said, "Hi, good young lady." Well, I'm going to be 89 in a month, so I'm not young, but he said, "Hi, young lady," and then he puts his hand on his granddaughter and he says, "This was my 3rd grade teacher a few years ago." Well, again, many years ago, but there again, it's fun to see them, to see their grandkids, to talk about the many good times that we had, and to know that, that they will come and talk to me, even though I might see them someplace and there's something familiar, but I might not recognize them, and now I have trouble remembering names, so I'm thankful when they tell me their name. So thankful for every school I worked in and for all the people that I was with. Thankful too for each of you for being interested. Can I speak?
Yes, you may. Were you not going to if I said no?
I would like to tell all of the parents, most of you were parents at any rate, and I'm sure you did, but one thing I would like to encourage parents to do is when you get a good teacher, when you get a teacher that has done something unique or is kind or solves a problem, write them a note or go and see them or call them up or text them and tell them how much you appreciate it, because with the way the world is now, we're going so fast that all of this, you ask a youngster about a teacher and, "Oh yeah, I remember he or she did such a good thing," and they probably never knew it. And we teachers, we really appreciate when we were appreciated. Yeah. So be sure you let them know, even if it's just wave to them.
With that, I would like to thank all the country school teachers. I would like to thank, how many other teachers do we have here today? We got some teachers here. All right. I want to thank all the teachers that are here, because we're making it sound like country school was a dream. No, we're not either, are we? It was very difficult, very challenging, but they would go back and do it in a minute because they love teaching. I want to thank the taxpayers, by the way, this school district for this facility. If you remember, we used to be doing this in the Sylvan Town Hall. We overloaded that significantly, so I appreciate that. And I want to thank, I did get a little help on technology from the Sylvan staff, the Sylvan Township staff, so I appreciate that. Marcia Ferris back there. And your company again is?
Easy Street Video Production.
Easy Street Video Productions. And so the reason I want to make sure you know that is on the township website, once it gets all edited, Her husband Dan does the editing and stuff, and maybe she's gonna edit it. At any rate, that'll be on our website, so you can, if somebody missed this and they want to see it, we'll have it there. I'd like to, a quote here that I want to do, and I think it's fitting for every one of these teachers, because I think you can tell how good their hearts are. And I was reading, Betty was in the Pillager Hall of Fame, Pillager School Hall of Fame. And there's a quote, they asked her to tell her about teaching, and she said, I would like to help each and every student to know that there is no one else in the whole wide world with their exact personality, looks, or capabilities. And then, because they are so special as my kids, I would hope and pray that they would hold kindness and honesty at its highest priority. Now that's a teacher, and I think they all exhibit those characteristics. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and especially for our panel. So let's give them a big hand. I know I watched when folks were coming in and the stories are going, I should have just had a mic out there and I'd heard more stories, and I wouldn't believe most of them. Because they started to exaggerate a lot. But if you go out where we first came in and you go to the right, we're gonna have the doors open there and we're gonna have cookies and coffee there if you want. Look at those maps out there. Gordon would appreciate any ideas and thoughts you have about that school he's looking for, the law school near Galswick's farm. And so let's just go out there and have a cup of coffee you'd like. I don't have a cup for everybody, but some of you don't drink coffee this time of night. I didn't expect this many people, quite frankly, and I appreciate y'all coming. We're gonna have another one in a month, and the next one is going to be on the railroad. It's gonna be on the Great Northern and the development of it as it came through the gap here. And so many families were employed by the railroad in one aspect or another in this area. So that's gonna be an interesting one. It's gonna be by Jeremy Jackson, who's a Brainerd native, but he lives in the cities. He does all sorts of things. He's the one that did, oh yeah. By the way, I had mentioned to him that I was gonna have this session, and he says, I know somebody you should talk to. She was my sixth grade teacher. She lives up in Leader. I said, oh, I think I know her. So, anyway, with that, thanks for coming. If you want a cookie, there should be some out there. If you want coffee, you better hurry. And if you don't want coffee, you can go to the Uptown Bar. So,
I want to thank my family, my neighbors, teacher friends, neighbors, whoever you are who came tonight. You know, teachers are just people, just like you. We touched children's lives, but you touch lives every day. And it's important that we treat each other with kindness, honesty, and just enjoy life.